bringing new perspectives to the superhero genre through a variety of lenses involving deaf and Native American cultures. Echo is a fresh new Marvel series that is surely to leave you easily entertained.
No, I am your father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I am your host, Bryson Olson, here to bring you all the latest in entertainment. It's always a great time. Today we are talking about the new Marvel show, well, kind of limited series because it's only 5 episodes, Echo. We were first introduced to Echo in the Hawkeye series. Her real name is Maya Lopez, the character's real name. She's played by Alaqua Cox, and both the character and the actual actor are deaf and an amputee, and so we kind of get to explore some aspects of that and some Native American culture dynamics because the character is from the Choctaw Nation. I believe the actor is from the Menominee and Mohican nations. I think just from 2 parents. Correct me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But yeah, it provides some new perspectives and just some new insights in those kind of cultures, as well as adding to a lot of deaf culture that has not been seen yet in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and is not very often seen within movies in general. It's not a very fleshed out culture in Hollywood. It's gotten a bit more traction with movies like Coda, Sound of Music, A Quiet Place, and obviously we have Echo now as a series. And that kind of gets things a bit more into it with how deaf culture is portrayed. But as someone who is a CODA myself, which if you don't know, CODA means child of a deaf adult. My dad's deaf, and so that means my first language was actually sign language. I learned that growing up. And anytime I see a deaf character, I really like to see how it gets used in the story and what they are going to do with it. And I think it's always fun to actually know what the people are signing when they're on screen, and that's always great. So kind of first off, to talk about that a little bit, let's talk more about the deafness side of the story. Maya Lopez is deaf. She's sort of part of the criminal world that Kingpin holds. He is killed by her in the end of Hawkeye. Sorry, spoilers if you haven't seen it yet. But she was kind of like a spy for him, essentially, like one of his right-hand men, essentially, or women in this case. And she was very much into, like, not exactly the more grunt work stuff, but she liked doing the more violent things. She was more like a hitman type thing, and she kind of used that to her advantage. She used the deafness to her advantage. Typically, when someone loses or was born with, as this character is and the actor is, if you're born without a specific sense, most often your other senses go into a more hyperactive state. They explain this really well in the Daredevil series, obviously, which this is connected because it is Kingpin, and Daredevil even is in the first episode of this series. You kind of see how she gets introduced to the world and kind of goes toe-to-toe with him. But in the Daredevil series, they explain that as well. Typically, when you lose one of your senses, your other senses will start being used more to compensate, just naturally. You don't really choose to do it, but that's how it is. And typically with deaf people, that primary overcompensating sense is going to be their eyes. They become very visually aware. And when you're a character who's essentially a spy or an assassin, you do have to be very hyperly visually aware of your surroundings. And so they kind of use that to explain more why she can do what she do. She can watch people do things, and she knows how to sit and quote unquote listen, because obviously it's not listening, but she can watch, and she kind of learns by doing all those things. And that is very much how it would be for a deaf person in this world and in the modern world here where we're all living as well. That is very much how it is. They typically will watch. They aren't always like silent, obviously, but typically what happens when they're incorporated into more of a hearing world, they have a more sit back approach and watch and be a bit more observant than your average person. And I think when you're trying to have a character who is incredibly smart and knows how to plan things ahead and how to not have it not backfire on her as much, having that visual sense be amplified so much is exciting. I was kind of hoping to see a bit more of Daredevil just because of that reason. I thought it was going to be interesting to see like someone who has hyper hearing to someone who has a lot more hyper sight go against each other, but we really only ever see it in the first episode, and maybe we'll see more of Echo in the future, so I'm kind of excited to see that. But I do like the way they portray Maya's deafness as well. It's usually very often where you just get that high-pitched ringing sound, which sometimes that is the case. It's usually more the case if someone has gone deaf in their life. You will have more of that tinnitus sound that is used in sound design, but not all people with deafness are going to have that. Not everyone has lost it. Some, they were just born without it. And so I like the way they use the sound design to give a new take on a deaf person's perspective. They use obviously a lot of muffled sounds most of the time, and like it's not muffled like you can still understand things. It's like muffled and only using low frequencies that aren't really discernible, just that you, like a hearing person listening to them, it's like vibrations is what it's portraying. And I think that's the smart way to go about it, because when someone is fully deaf, they're not going to hear anything, but they are going to feel things. You may feel someone's voice vibrating. You may feel the ground shaking when someone just walks, and they use the sound design for that specific reason. They're not trying to be like, oh, this is what a deaf person hears. They're like, no, let's show the perspective of a deaf person just happening to use sound. Because when you're watching a movie, you can't always have all your senses. Your main ones that you're experiencing when you're watching a movie is your sight and your hearing. So you don't know how it feels to be a deaf person, but they can trick your ears into kind of giving that illusion of feeling. Using those low notes, it gives the illusion of vibration, and you're like, oh, so this is kind of more how it would feel. They could feel a heartbeat. They could feel a stomp. They could feel someone's voice. Like if you put your hand up to your throat, you can feel it instead of just hearing it. And that, I think, is a much, not exactly more accurate way, but from someone who has a dad who didn't ever hear, he was born without his hearing, that is more what I think of when I think of sound design for a deaf person, is not that tinnitus type ringing, but more silent, and understanding that it's vibrations, not sound that's coming through, and it's a different sense. And so I think using that in a movie allows people to expand their understanding of how a deaf person perceives the world. And I think that's what this series did really well, was expand on different kinds of perspectives. And that kind of leads me into another perspective that they were talking about and kind of showed throughout the movie, which is more of the Native American perspective, which, like I said, the character, they are part of the Choctaw Nation, based out of Oklahoma, which Marvel Studios collaborated with a lot during the production of this, so that they could have it a lot more accurate and true to life, essentially. And one of the things they do in this series, basically Maya is almost a direct descendant, essentially, of the first Choctaw, which I don't know how accurate the story is that they put into the Marvel Universe, but essentially they have this, I don't know, like being, I don't know if it's exactly a person, but a being where the nation is initially just in a cave, and this person freeze them from their cave, and then they turn into humans, and they have this power to protect their family and people. And, it's kind of passed down throughout the ages. And Maya, of course, she's kind of directly related to this person, and they kind of have powers, but not in a super magical sense, which I liked. I feel like what happens super often, and I don't know, obviously, because look at me, I'm a white person. I don't know how Native Americans feel about certain stereotypes, but typically what I see from the stereotypes is usually having an ethnic Native American person be magical and not giving a reason for it other than that's just because it's part of their tribe. And, maybe that is something that's not super stereotypical, but from an outsider perspective, that does seem stereotypical, and they don't give a reason why they're connected to something. And this, they give Maya powers, but make it more as a spiritual connection. She's learning from her ancestors and using that now, and not really using her ancestors to power herself, if that makes any sense. I think it's using their culture to inspire how Maya is as a character, rather than using their culture to explain, like, we can be magical because, we're natives, we got that kind of thing. And because I feel like that's a common stereotype that tends to happen. And it's like, why? Like, typically what we've learned about Native American tribes and indigenous people is just that they are more spiritually connected to their ancestors, to nature, and that is usually what they base a lot of their cultures around. And typically, I think if you're going to base powers for a indigenous character, you have to relate it back to that. You have to give a reason why you're making them have these powers, and not just, ooh, we want them to be magical because they're not white, but instead relating it to their culture, relating it to their ancestors. There's a big fight scene at the end of the series where Maya kind of calls upon her ancestors and helps her grandma and her cousin to fight off Kingpin's henchmen. And I take it to see as being less of a power, but more of that learning. It's learning from your ancestors, and even if like they're having that connection and can like witness it, it's that spiritual connection. And that to me seems more believable than just the magical powers. It's learning from your ancestors, calling back on them and being like, we learned this, it's in our blood, it's in our DNA, we know how to do this thing and we can do it, rather than just, ooh, it's a mystical power that can't really be explained. It's magic. I don't really like those kinds of magic. I want it to be more explained in a logical kind of way. And in this show, I think that's how they do it. I think using your ancestors and your culture to connect with superpowers and use them in a way that doesn't seem all that outrageous and seems a lot more believable, I think allows you to be more truthful to the culture that you are portraying. And obviously the actor is of indigenous descent, so very likely could have had some input in that. They obviously worked with the Choctaw Nation to make sure things were more accurate, and I think that allowed a better representation of that culture that I didn't know anything about, but it seems more believable in this world of the MCU and how they portray everything to have it done that way. And I liked it. I like how they're taking these different perspectives for this character, because she's deaf, she's indigenous, she's an amputee. They take all these different perspectives and allow them to mix and give us some representation that's actually real and doesn't feel forced. It's not trying to just shove it down your throats. It's actually using it in the storytelling and doing good writing. I've noticed some reviews where people kind of think it's a bit of a mess, but I don't necessarily think so. I think it is giving real representations of cultures that people don't understand. And because they don't understand them, that's why they don't like them. But I think as someone who is kind of like between two worlds of hearing and a deaf world, I understand how to view different perspectives like that. And it makes me intrigued to learn about a new perspective. And I think that's why representation is getting more important in Hollywood. We want real representation. In this series, that's exactly what they're doing. Like I said, the actor, Aliqua Cox, is deaf, an amputee, and Indigenous. And you usually want an actor that is similar to your character. And obviously that's the whole thing with acting. And it's kind of a stigma that it's hard to come past because there are certain things like, so say like a disability, like being deaf or blind. It is hard to determine if that is okay to get an actor that is not either of those things and cast them. There is a bit of a stigma because obviously acting, you have to be able to fill a role. You are supposed to be putting yourself in their shoes and portraying a character that has these things. It's like a job. And obviously acting is a job, but not all their roles are acting. They're playing basketball players, they're playing superheroes, they're playing pilots. Not all of them are these things, but they can portray these kind of characters. And so you end up having this huge conflict because you're like, well, what is okay for them to play but not? Like, but a lot of these other things, they don't always have a distinct look to them. Like unless you saw them signing or talked to them, you could never tell a deaf person was deaf unless there's like a hearing aid or something. And that kind of causes a bit of confusion onto what kind of characters can people play. And I personally think that it depends on the character. For this example, the character is always deaf. They're not losing their hearing, and they're obviously an actual amputee. They are a Native American. You want an actual actor that fits these criteria for the character. And I don't know if Echo is actually all of these things in the comics, but that seems to be how they rolled with the story for this series. So obviously, whether it was intentional or not, that fit the criteria, and they have a deaf person playing a deaf person. I don't think it's always going to be that case, and we're still going to have great representations of both. And I think for some examples of that, we have like Charlie Cox, who in Daredevil, he is obviously not really blind. He is a seeing person, and he sees just like a lot of other people. He's not actually blind, but to properly portray his character, he did a lot of research. He would wear specific contacts to actually make himself blind so that he could act it properly. And that, to me, seems more acceptable because they are not trying to portray it in a false light. They're trying to portray how it actually would be. An actor taking the time to actually blind themselves and learn how to actually be blind is interesting. And I think another big example is from the movie Sound of Metal. You have Riz Ahmed, who learned sign language to the fluency of like 6 months because Ruben, his character, is at a deaf support group, like a rehab center camp, sort of. And he lost his hearing, and he's around all these deaf people, and he's around them for about 6 months. And so the director said he had to learn sign language to the fluency that the character would know. And that, I think, is a good representation because the actor is hearing, but his character loses his hearing, and he's very new to the world, and he has to learn sign language. And I think that is an accurate way to depict it, because although Riz Ahmed did not actually become deaf, he did have to become a part of deaf culture in order to properly portray the character. And that, I think, is okay. And I think it's hard hard to say we need representation and then accept those kind of things. But I think in cases such as Echo, where we can have an actor who is an actual deaf person, an actual amputee, an actual Native American, and have them portray a character that fits all those things and it's integral to the story, that is good representation. It shouldn't just be we're putting it in for the sake of it and then being insensitive by not using someone from those groups. And it all depends, I think, on the story. And that's why I think Echo does so well, because they make each part integral to the story. Her Maya's mom, I believe, is deaf in the story, so it's kind of like genetically passed, and so makes sense that they're using deaf culture and signing. The characters are obviously indigenous, and so that's a big part of their culture and how the powers work, and the character is an amputee, and they use that to their advantage. It's like they lost it in the show from a car accident. They kind of break it when trying to just escape on like a train heist, and it doesn't necessarily hurt them, but it still becomes a problem for them. And it's not going to happen usually in the real world, where some amputee with a prosthetic leg is going to be jumping on a train and getting it stuck in something. But it's very likely that someone's leg could be broken, and it's obvious in it, I'd hope, doesn't hurt them, but it just becomes an inconvenience that they then need to work out. And those kind of things are just interesting to me to see how they're portrayed, especially by someone who is a member of that group that is getting representation. And that is why I think Echo does so good, is because it represents, it gives people new perspectives that they weren't used to before, and still tells a very compelling story. And I think a series like that is something that Marvel needs to do more of, and doing so will leave the audience easily entertained. So before we go, since we just covered everything all about Echo, we got a couple things before we leave. First, we got our rating of the series overall. And if you don't know what that is, because it is season 2, heck yeah, I know it's so awesome that we're in season 2. We have implemented a new rating system since it is easily entertained and we kind of enjoy a bit of everything here. So we can't really just do a scale of 1 to 10 because we'd pretty much be going just from 5. So our scale is garbage. You don't ever need to see it. Once is fine. Kind of self-explanatory. You could see it once in the theater or at home, but then you're kind of good. You don't really need to see it again. You have right mood, which is, you got to be in the right mood to watch it. You may want to watch it again. It may be a while. Quotable. You kind of think about it sometimes and you can remember quotes from it. So it's kind of better than right mood, because right mood you have to specifically be like, oh, I kind of want to watch that movie. But quotable, it can kind of live in your head rent free sometimes. Go to. It's the movie when you're watching with your friends or with your family. That's a movie that you're like, yeah, we can watch that one. That one's a great movie. And then all day, every day. You could watch it 24/7 and never get sick of it. So that is our rating system. And I'm going to put Echo, I would say, at right mood. I do love a lot of the perspectives that are shown. I like that it's not a CGI monster fest and the characters actually feel real, and I like all the representation and culture that they provide, which I probably just said. I cannot remember. I'm losing my mind today. But some of the writing and some of the character development just seems a bit slow or shallow. The character's not fleshed out a ton, and they seem very reserved and quiet even at the end. And that, I think, could use some improvement if they decide to do a season 2 or to just expand on the character. So I would put this one at right mood. If you have a rating that you would give Echo, please let us know. And, of course, before we leave, we have our question of the week. This is our question that we have every week to get you involved in the discussion. You can answer in the comments below, or you can respond on our Q&A on Spotify or whatever. Wherever you're listening, answer our question of the week. So this week's question is, what is your favorite sign? So you may have to do a little bit of research before you do this because, It is sign language, and if you're not incredibly familiar, as I am, you may not know what your favorite sign is. So I'd say go check it out. Go look up some signs, find something that you think is your favorite. Or if you already know sign language, let us know. And let's see, what would my favorite sign be? I even wrote down the question and didn't really think about it. I do have a favorite swear, but I can't really say that on here because I keep this show pretty family friendly. But I would say my favorite sign would probably go mountain. I just kind of like the action that it does. So this is how you do it. You take two fists, put them together, and then you do that. You kind of throw it out. And that is, I believe, how you're supposed to sign mountain. That was what I was taught at one point, and then hopefully it is not wrong anymore because sign language, like all languages, kind of evolves. But yeah, that's what I would say is kind of mine. I kind of just like the movement it does. So let us know what your favorite sign is, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Go check us out on social media where you can get more entertainment things. I seriously cannot talk today. Like initial thoughts, mini reviews, and just general entertainment stuff. You can check us out on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. X. I forget that's what it's called. It's just at Easily Entertained Podcast, pretty much anywhere you are checking us out. But yeah, until next time, bye. You have been easily entertained.